I have been working in different companies doing transportation for 7 years. That night, driving a truck, I was speeding along a deserted road in a hurry to deliver a load, the dark night plunging me into gloom. Suddenly, in the headlights, I noticed the figure of a man standing next to my car. He was waving at me, clearly asking for help. Not without hesitation, I decided to stop and find out what had happened. The man who identified himself as Jack appeared before me, his eyes blazing with an unnatural light in the darkness. It was strange that he was in these forgotten places with a puddle of rain left over from the world. His voice sounded like an echo from the past, reminiscent of the pounding hooves of a distressed horse. He asked for help with the car, but his gaze was somewhat distorted by a shadow of mystery. Handing over the tools, I took refuge in the cab of the truck again, but through the windshield I saw dark figures floating through the darkness toward Jack. Their outlines were strange, their footsteps soundless, like ghosts condensed into reality. Like an eerie theater of fear, they began to drag Jack slowly into the darkness of the forest, as if anticipating their ghastly feast. Not wanting to attract attention, I stepped out of the cabin and slowly began walking down the path in the direction of the disturbing picture. As I got closer, I made out the horrifying details. Jack's body was mutilated, a gaping hole lurked in his chest, and there was a mysteriously black spear piercing him to the very bones. Next to the dark figures in tattered clothes, they slowly turned in my direction, and there was not a shred of humanity in their eyes, only the hunger of madness and darkness. When I suddenly noticed dark, slowly approaching figures in the shadows of the forest, my heart sank. They were clad in rags, their faces obscured by darkness and obscurity, but their footsteps were firm and inexorable. I could not see their features, but I felt a piercing coldness and fear that made me instantly turn and run away. My feet carried me through the dense forest, branches scratching my skin, digging into the soft fabric of my clothes. Every breath I took was filled with the smell of rot and decay, as if the forest itself refused to let me pass through its embrace. But the fear of these unknown forces was stronger than my anxiety. With my legs barely keeping me on my feet, I seemed to be on the verge of complete exhaustion. The dark figures that had so unexpectedly appeared in my path had disappeared into the darkness, but their ghostly menace could still be felt in the air, like a trail of devouring terror. I struggled through the dense foliage, trying to stay out of their grasp, until I finally reached a sparse part of the forest where the thickets were denser. Clutching at branches and tearing through thorny bushes, I fell to my knees, exhausted and frightened to the core. My breathing was frantic, my heart was pounding like a drum, and my thoughts weaved haphazardly through my shattered mind. Peeking out of hiding, I noticed the shadows of the cursed entities gliding past, seeking me out with relentless thirst. Their footsteps were ungainly, as if the ground itself drew them to my final resting place. A feeling of helplessness swept over me as they began to search every corner, every bush, as if they already knew where I hid. Awe and terror made me shiver, but I knew I couldn't hide for long. With terror in my heart and determination in my eyes, when I lost sight of those frightening figures, I swung my arm, and without looking back, I ran toward freedom, toward my truck. When I reached the truck, I immediately called the police. Soon the officers arrived on the scene and were met with a horrible sight. Jack's senseless and mutilated body lay before them, his skin riddled with sharp cuts that looked nothing like the marks left by a cold weapon. It had been several years since that story, but I was still horrified to imagine it over and over again, realizing that such stories only happened once in a lifetime. I had been working as a lorry driver since I was 29 years old and worked a lot of nights and had my fair share of experience making long journeys. I was driving down the motorway and time was passing quickly. As I looked up, I saw a weathered old 1953 Ford F-100 pickup truck following my truck at an intimidating distance. It all started a few hours ago when I noticed this pickup truck in my rear view mirror. It was following my truck like a ghost, not lagging behind for a second. I was overcome with a strange feeling of unease, as if I sensed that this vehicle carried something sinister about it. Soon I noticed that the pickup truck started to get closer and closer. I tried to speed up, but it seemed that the faster I drove, the closer it crept. My pulse sped up and my skin was covered in cold sweat. Around midnight, when I decided to pull over to the side of the road to see what was going on, the pickup stopped too. Suddenly, a strange whispering started coming from the darkness, as if someone was whispering something inaudible but ominous. My hands trembled as I stepped out of the cab and turned towards that vehicle. Through the glass of the pickup, I discerned a dark hooded figure staring at me with glittering eyes. I thought I heard a shriek of distant protest, and a roll of thunder pierced the night sky. The next moment, the pickup vanished, as if it had dissolved into darkness. The residue of the ominous presence never left me as I decided to return to the cab and continue on my way. Several years have passed since that night, but I still have nightmares where I see the pickup truck and hear that whisper. Life has become unreal, like I'm stuck in a nightmare that doesn't want to let me go. I worked as a trucker, and on this day I was leisurely delivering cargo on my comfortable lorry. The truck was powerful, I had a lot of driving experience, and I knew the road almost by heart. Besides, I always enjoyed driving a lorry. This time, however, fate had something special in store for me. After driving for several hours across the endless American prairie, I came to a narrow, deserted road through a dense forest. The branches of the trees creaked over the cab of the truck, and the light of the sun barely broke through the dense foliage. Suddenly, there was a deafening crack, and I felt the wheel of the giant tractor-trailer go flat. Cursing my bad luck, I pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the cab to check the damage. The darkening forest around me seemed somehow unfriendly and ominous. While I was in the process of replacing the wheel, I felt something watching me. I looked around, but saw no one. Only the rustling of leaves and the unfamiliar smell of rot permeated my nostrils. My heart beat faster. When I finished my work, I quickened my step, wanting to leave the ominous forest. But at some point I stopped when I felt something moving behind me. Turning around, I saw two glittering eyes in the darkness. "Who's there?" I whispered, but all I heard in response was a muffled, hoarse laugh. I felt fear gripping my heart. I realized that something terrible and inexplicable was waiting for me here, deep in the forest. Climbing back into the cabin, I anxiously started the engine and sped forward without turning round. But the shadow that haunted me came closer and closer. I heard the breath of this unknown creature, felt its piercing gaze on my back. At last, when I overcame the last bends of the road, I realized that it would not be easy to get out of this forest. Suddenly, a vague figure with a scythe in its hand appeared in front of me, and I saw my reflection in its black eyes. It's been over 3 years since that story, and I still picture this story from my life in horrific detail.